So we'll settle into our meditation posture. In a moment, we'll do our slow chanting of the three refuges, as we often do. Having, especially those of you online, having to use your imagination, just sensing the community, singing, chanting together. And it's really our job, in a creative way to bring to mind with the word Buddha. We're reflecting on something that's here and now, not somebody who lived 2,500 years ago, even though that the idea of the historic Buddha might be very inspiring for some of you. But what's inspiring is this potential in our own mind and heart. And Dhamma are the conditions, the underlying reality that's here and now. And Sangha is this potential to participate in our lives with a kind of freedom and fullness and creativity and skillfulness, love and wisdom that's really both functional and beautiful. So let's begin. I'll ring the bell 3 times, simply receiving the sound of the bell. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Sanghang saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchāmi. So we'll take our time and settle in. Probably most of us have our own ritual, but bring a quality of freshness, a more authentic or sincere caring for the body and the mind now as we make any final adjustments, and there's a basic science to sitting meditation. The more relaxed and still the sitting posture, the more it supports the stillness and settling of the mind and heart. So cultivate a posture that allows you to be relatively comfortable, relatively still. It won't be perfect, of course, but we do the best we can. Valuing stillness in the body without getting tight about it. And as you feel more settled, the next step, just useful to bring to mind liberating our mind or putting down any thoughts about the limitations of our practice or the limitations of our ability to realize what the Buddha and other wise folks have realized before us. It's so easy for us, mostly unconsciously, to impose limitations on ourselves, and then in a way to be trapped by the limits that we, in a sense, believe in. Oh, I can't get concentrated, not with my mind. And it becomes a kind of reality, just that identification with our own limitations, what we imagine our own limitations are. Because the truth is, we don't really know the capacity, the potential of our own mind. So we need an open mind about the potential of this heart and mind for peace, for wisdom, for all these beautiful qualities that we hear about in practice. We might as well, it's probably skillful, to keep open that this heart also shares that potential, this capacity for awakening, for deeply touching into peace and serenity, tranquility, stillness, a beautiful radiant balance. So do any processing that might be useful to uncover an openness to what might be possible, even in this sit tonight. There's a particularly beautiful image the Buddha used way back when that you might want to bring to mind. And the image is of a mother cow crossing a river, and then being on the other side, turns around and has that lowing, that call to the calves. You can make it too. You need to do this too. You have the capacity to cross over too. And that's the image the Buddha used in terms of the elders, the awakened ones, willing to teach, willing to be that mother cow, lowing, making that call to all us young ones. I know you can do it. You have no choice. You have to do this, and I know you can do it. No matter how restless, no matter how much physical discomfort, no matter how much unfinished business or difficulties there are in our lives, there is this lawfulness. As the Buddha evidently said, recorded in the Anapanasati Sutta, where he's talking about the factors of awakening. Practitioners, on whatever occasion you abide contemplating the body as a body, feelings as feelings, mind as mind, mind objects as mind objects, ardent, fully aware, mindful, having put aside covetousness and grief for the world, on that occasion, unremitting mindfulness is established. Abiding thus mindful, one investigates and examines this present state with wisdom and embarks on a full inquiry. So we just let the moment reveal itself. And the Buddha goes on, in one who investigates and examines, not by thinking, in one who investigates and examines that state with wisdom and embarks in a full inquiry into it, tireless energy is aroused. So just sense this potential for tireless, unshaken, steadfast. This present moment is relevant, worthy of my interest, my attention, just as it is. And then the Buddha continues, in one who is aroused, who has aroused energy, rapture arises. This joyful interest is the opposite of boredom. It's this conviction that the present moment is relevant, what's here and now. And then continues, in one who is rapturous, full of joy, the body and the mind become tranquil, settled, serene. And the Buddha continues, in one whose body is tranquil and who feels pleasure, the mind becomes concentrated, still, like a non-flickering candle flame. A mind not pushed around by its desires, not pushed around by what comes and goes. Sense this potential for stillness. And then finally, the Buddha says, one closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. So this radiant balance, stillness is like this. This is how the 4 foundations of mindfulness developed and cultivated fulfill the 7 factors of awakening. Breathing in, sensitive to what's here and now. Breathing out, allowing these conditions to be the way they are. Using the simple rhythm of breathing in and breathing out, using the totality of the experience of the body sitting as you breathe in and breathe out as a way in, a way to be with the present moment with a lot of integrity and joyful interest, unwavering presence, relaxation, and kindness. And let's continue for a while in silence. So for the purposes of our course, and this part of the course where we're learning about the 7 factors of awakening, in the context of being aware of the body and the breath and the body, learn to recognize and to deeply appreciate the capacity for unremitting mindfulness, keeping the present moment in mind. And with the present moment in mind, the awakening factor of investigation can allow the moment to reveal itself. Wisdom can be interested in the underlying nature, the lawful nature of how things unfold. It's not about thinking. It's about letting the moment reveal itself, letting it be a teacher. And the heart is inspired to be dedicated, to have continuous effort, persistence, unwavering, keeping the present moment in mind, allowing conditions to reveal themselves. And allowing joy to naturally arise, this unification, fullness, absence of boredom. And supports serenity, tranquility, stillness and concentration, and a more resonant balance or equanimity. So as we continue for another 10 minutes or so, you can just use this list of 7 factors of awakening to learn to see how these factors are here and now in the heart, in the mind. And be willing to begin again and again. We'll take a few more minutes, and let's in particular attune to passaddhi, this factor of tranquility or serenity. So from rapture, from joyful interest, the heart settles, becomes more content, more serene, not really interested in moving, neither the body moving nor the mind moving, just happy to be right here. So just notice, be interested, even if it's quite faint, be interested in the beginnings or even the full development of tranquility. The Pali word is passaddhi. So again, it's all about a willingness to keep a particular quality in mind, to recognize tranquility, even if it's faint, and simply to keep it in mind, keep it in mind. And you can even do this in the context of being aware of breathing in, aware of breathing out. Breathing in, experiencing, noticing tranquility. Breathing out, noticing, experiencing tranquility. Not afraid to be interested in this pleasure of tranquility, wholesome pleasure of tranquility. And the Buddha taught that for a happy mind, concentration comes relatively easily. So perhaps just sensing the background of stillness and peace, the mind unwavering, undisturbed. Stillness is like this. Peace is like this. And just as the Buddhist mind evidently had become very competent and very clearly aware of these beautiful factors of awakening, so too this mind has the same potential. This mind can become very aware, very interested, and develop the same factors of awakening: mindfulness, investigation, steadfastness or persistence, joy, tranquility, concentration, and the radiant balance of equanimity. No need to rush, but feel free to adjust your bodies, whatever feels good for you. Thanks, Pat. And again, a big welcome to everyone. Tonight is week 7, studying the 4th foundation of mindfulness, one of the most famous collection of teachings in the Pali Canon. Actually, it's found in all the traditions. The Pali Canon, these early teachings are embedded in the Tibetan Buddhist canon and the Sanskrit canon that went into China and then got translated into Chinese. And it's basically the Buddha teaching us, and we've been studying this since the winter, like what does the mind need to understand to be aware of the body? So that first foundation we studied in January, and then in the spring, the foundation of feeling, tone, and then in the summer, mindfulness of the mind. And it may seem like this 4th foundation is the same, but mindfulness of the mind is more simply just noticing there's a mind, right? And in this moment, the mind has these particular qualities. It's a tight mind or it's an expansive mind, but we're not trying to develop the mind. The 4th foundation is all about the lawfulness of developing the mind, how we starve the qualities that aren't helping, the hindrances, right? Weaken the hindrances, and how we feed and balance the factors of awakening. And next week, I'll talk about equanimity, but also how in the tradition they talk about balancing the energizing, investigation, effort, and joy with the tranquilizing, serenity, concentration, and equanimity are the tranquilizing factors.
Pretty good.
And it's like once have that stability, oh, there is a body, there is a mind. And remember, feeling tone, what we did in the spring, that's part of the mind, but it's such an important part of the mind activity, how the mind always is categorizing every experience as pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, based on its past conditioning. That's why you might experience something as pleasurable and I might experience it as painful, because we have different conditioning, right? So it is a mental event when we notice, oh, this is pleasurable or this is painful. It's an activity of the mind. So we studied that in the spring. So the mind and the body is like this. And then with the 4th foundation, we're not just a passive, well, I can just be mindful, but how I'm mindful, what I pay attention to, and how I pay attention can weaken the unhelpful qualities that might already be present in the mind and keep them from coming in, and can develop and strengthen and maintain the wholesome qualities of mind, like the 7 factors of awakening. And remember, the awakening process isn't something somebody does, it's something that happens when the supporting causes are there. It's a natural process. It's the same thing when I descend into a hell realm and I'm just frantic or upset or acting out and caught in my own drama. That also isn't something I'm doing. It's happening, the drama and the intensity of my, let's say, unwholesome qualities of mind. It's happening because of causes and conditions. Like a whirlpool is a natural happening. There's nobody, there's no entity doing the whirlpool when you see one in a river or a little, you see sometimes in open spaces, especially this time of year with all the leaves, you see the little swirls of wind. I don't know, did they have a name? Those little mini tornadoes that you could see in the, when the wind gets spun around like that, dust can get kicked up, right? It's just a natural phenomena. And when there's supporting conditions for it, it's there. And when there aren't supporting conditions, it's not there. Now, the thing that really changes things, because, in terms of the awakening process, we always want to think of it in terms of, I'm here as a deluded human being, and I'm trying to get to the top of the mountain of enlightenment, something like that. But actually, the awakening process is more about realizing that me, being a deluded being who thinks he has to get to the top of the mountain, is not how it is. That's the awakening process. There isn't somebody who has to get somewhere. There's this sense, this appearance of me, and the correction of that ignorance. That's really the awakening process. We're correcting the misperception of what this is. So it's more about what's let go of, the wrong perception, clinging to the wrong perceptions, than what is gained. It isn't that somebody's got to gain something or get somewhere. It's that the mind clinging to its fixed ideas that don't line up with reality has to cease. That unhelpful clinging to wrong ideas has to cease. And the way that happens is lawful, not something somebody does. It just requires a mind that has liberated itself from the seductiveness of the hindrances, wanting, not wanting. This is what we talked about the first half of the course, right? Wanting, not wanting, caught up, identified with dullness and sleepiness, caught up and identified with restlessness and worry, or with doubt. These are the 5 hindrances. The ways, the patterns of the mind that hinder the mind's clarity, that allows it to see things as they are. So we get skillful at not feeding the hindrances, get even more skillful at abandoning the hindrances, keeping them from returning. When we do that well enough, then the factors of awakening become more obvious to the mind, especially when we get to pointing out instructions. Yeah, notice the capacity for unremitting mindfulness, keeping the present moment in mind, non-distraction. Notice this capacity, like this quality of wisdom, interest, that allows the moment to reveal itself. Oh, it's changing. It's ephemeral. It's lawful. There's so much we learn. It doesn't matter if the mind is observing the breath or sound or mental activity, because every single aspect of nature is going to reveal some of these underlying principles. Whatever the mind knows with that kind of wisdom interest, which is the second factor, usually translated as investigation of dhammas, investigation of the way it is, right? It's going to reveal the lawful, ephemeral, impermanent, unsatisfactory, which means not worthy of me or any sense of a me identifying or clinging to it. Not personal, not worthy of grasping. And then the energy gets inspired, like, oh, there's a lot to learn here. And that supports that steadfast, that unwavering application of the knowing mind to the present moment. Because there's a real sense that there's value in the investigation. The investigation isn't empty, it really delivers. In a way, in life, there are only 2 pleasures that are dependable or trustworthy. There's the pleasure of a concentrated mind, and there's the pleasure of insight. And these are sort of, in the Buddhist tradition, we might call them unworldly pleasures, because it isn't the pleasure of me getting what I want, which is normally what we think of pleasure, right? It's the pleasure, like with concentration, it's the pleasure of retreating from sense experience, going inward. And it's just like, if you've been out, I don't know if you've ever been out in a really windy environment. I did this backpack trip. This is way back in like 81, I think it was, in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, like in November. It was really cold. It was so windy. And they had these huts, that they built. And then I put my tent up in the hut. It's like 3-sided hut, one side is wide open. And this is, it's really bad weather generally in the White Mountains. But anyway, you'd go in there and then you get in your tent and then you get in your sleeping bag. So you're sort of somewhat removed. And it just felt so good to get out of the wind. And that's a little bit like retreating from the activity of mind. The happiness of concentration is, we don't realize it, but the mind, the sensitive heart, is constantly buffeted by sense experience. One sense impingement after another. Every time I have a sight, a sound, a thought, a touch, then I have to construct that I like it, I don't like it, it's neutral, I'm going to ignore it. And it triggers all the associated mental conditioning about that experience. So if I see yellow, then other experiences that had to do with yellow come to mind. And we don't realize it because it's sort of the water we swim in all day long, that it's stressful to be sensitive. So when the mind retreats in concentration, it's a real pleasure of like, no longer, at least in a temporary sense, no longer being buffeted by the diversity of experience through the eyes, through the ears, through touch, through thought, and smell and taste too. And then there's the happiness of insight, which doesn't arise from retreating, or some retreating is useful, but insight, like when the investigation of Dhammas, it's seeing something about sense experience that helps the mind understand, I don't need to be pushed around by this. Or there is nobody here to be pushed around. Maybe a little bit more accurate way to say it. It's always a little hard to put it into language. And this relates to equanimity, a kind of balance. Like the balance of equanimity can come from concentration, being really retreated. Like if you had everything you wanted, you would have a kind of equanimity, but that's based on your conditions being really suitable. But there's an equanimity, as we say in the Buddhist tradition, even in the midst of the 8 worldly winds of gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute, praise and blame. And we'll notice, like, this is one of the ways we can actually see that, over the 10 years of my practice, or 20 years of my practice, or 30 years of my practice, if that had happened 20 years ago, I would have really been pushed around. But this big thing just happened to me, and there's a lot of stability. I'm present, I feel emotion, I'm not like dead, or, I don't have this sort of I'm still sensitive, but I'm okay being sensitive. I'm not thrown off. I might feel a lot of sadness. I might even feel anger and other so-called unskillful emotions, but I'm not confused. Oh yeah, that anger happens when there's that sense of violation, but I don't need to be confused by that movement of anger, because I know that's something that happens when conditions are like this. I know it's not really personal. I know that it will be there, hot and feel like this, look like this, and then it will go away on its own, as long as the mind continues to understand what anger is and what it isn't. I don't actually have to repress or be afraid. I don't even need to do a so-called Dharma move. Like sometimes, oh, I better do metta because there's a lot of aversion. You don't even need to do that when the wisdom is really strong. And that's more the pleasure of insight is it's all okay. It's always been okay. It always will be okay. And does it mean that I don't get involved and don't do and don't live my life and live out my duties and responsibilities? But there's the element of fear and identification has been removed to some degree, and that's deeply pleasurable. And the thing is, this happiness, this inner happiness is really the cause for more concentration. So this is like the engine, unremitting mindfulness, investigation, the inspiration to apply the mind to seeing things as they are, until the whole mind body is, in a sense, absorbed, fully committed. And that coming together around the being present and investigating the way it is brings up the joy, the joyful interest, the rapture, because it's like the whole heart, mind, body is all together and being in the moment, seeing things as they are. There's not like the mind in conflict with itself or the body and mind in conflict with itself. And that, like the flow of that, the lack of friction in the heart is what we call joy. And it's the pleasure of joy that leads to the sense of serenity. I don't have to go anywhere. And we feel that both bodily, and this would be nice, like in our small groups tonight. Remember, for those of you on Zoom and here in the room, we have this commitment to show up together in small groups every other week, like tonight, our last time for this course. And what I thought would be really useful, of course, anything around the factors of awakening would be useful to share and reflect on out loud for your small group, and then have that open conversation after everyone has had a chance to share. But in particular, this quality of serenity, we don't really talk about it enough because it can tend to trigger in us this like, oh, poor me, I never have tranquility. You seem so much more tranquil than me, and it can kind of trigger more anxiety. But we want to understand that the arising of tranquility or serenity, contentedness, ease, settledness of the heart, not needing to go anywhere. And it really has that both physical and heart and mind sense. And it's a kind of pleasure, the pleasure of calm. And just to reflect, like in the small group, to reflect back through your life, when have there been moments of that, more profound settledness? I mean, obvious places, getting a good massage, having a good sauna, and then jumping into a cold lake, and then sitting afterward and just feeling that buzz. And it's nice to remember, these are more gross expressions of tranquility arising from outer conditions, but still it's useful to get a sense and to have that memory, that sense of, oh yeah, the body and mind knows the experience of being really profoundly settled. It's a capacity I have. And to start sensing it. Because when we're sitting, it's there, but the attention goes to the messes in the mind. Like the part of the body that's uneasy, the part of the mind that's uneasy. But, most of the meditation instructions are not always about looking at what's uneasy and unsettled. It's actually often more skillful to notice the settledness, even if the mind is more dominated by the unsettledness. Notice this capacity for being settled. Notice the beginnings of contentment, the beginnings of ease, sukha, that inner pleasure of the mind not feeling put upon by experience. As I said, I think in the set, a happy mind is easily concentrated. And wherever we can convince ourselves to have that full presence, which is really the first three factors, that unremitting mindfulness, that means, unremitting mindfulness means, I don't know much, but being present has got to be the most important thing, right? Keeping the present moment in mind. That's what that first is. There's no investigation without some serious commitment to being present, because that's the cause for being able to investigate phenomena the way it is. The mind has to be present, value present moment experience, not lost in thought. So it's really this unremitting mindfulness, the investigation, the steadfastness, and these kind of create the initial engine. And when these start humming along, that unification, that kind of coming together of the mind and heart around being present and comprehending the way it is, not thinking about it, but more directly, immediately comprehending the nature of experience, that coming together and the absence of the mind working against each other is the rapture, the joy, the sense of flow, the lightness, which makes us feel like I don't have to go anywhere, don't have to become anybody, don't have to figure anything out. And it's really important. I was reading some of what Joseph Goldstein said. He did a series of, I think it was like 45 talks or so on the Satipatthana, and then he turned it into his book. I have it in the office, but I didn't bring it out. Mindfulness, A Practical Guide to Awakening. One of the best overall books on the Buddhist path. I highly recommend it. And he has a chapter on each of the awakening factors in that book. And I was reading that today. Let's see, what was I going to say about that? I think I lost it. Yeah. Oh, maybe it'll come back to me. But anyway, I was talking about this fullness, this coming together of the mind, heart. And it's a kind of, Sharon Salzberg in her book calls it a kind of love, like that I'm willing to be 100% here, interested, curious. And in that, I'm willing to also put everything else down. Whatever the mind might otherwise be doing or worrying about or planning or remembering, that all falls away. And that's like an insight related to tranquility is all of those impulses to figure something out, to regurgitate something from the past, they can be there without picking them up. And that's something you can talk about in your small group too. Like when you think about moments of real tranquility and serenity, all those impulses of our mind didn't go anywhere. They still were there to obsess or whatever. So you might have even noticed in those moments of tranquility, like, I could, but I'm not going to go. I'm not going to do that now. I could, but I'm not going to do that. We're sitting just really content on the couch. I could make myself a cup of tea, but I don't have to. I could turn the TV on, but I don't need to. Even like in a sit, when there's a lot of tranquility, it's like, I know my knee hurts. I could stretch my leg out, but I don't have to. I'm okay. And it's not, so it's that settledness doesn't come from this sort of overlord, don't move, don't think. It really comes, it's more organic. It's like in every place, every cell, every part of the heart and mind, it's like that sense of serenity. It doesn't have like somebody's serene. It's the whole system gets settled, like the earth, being the earth. And it even can feel that way, just being held or being part of something immense. And poets and meditators, they sometimes try to language it in sometimes really beautiful ways. But it's really important, for this week, because it's actually that pleasure of serenity is actually the cause for concentration. And a lot of us, we want to go, oh, I knew I'd get back there. That's the point that Joseph was making in this chapter. He was saying, just in terms of him relaying his own experience as a meditator, and just like understanding that concentration is good and trying to go right there, like I'm going to get concentrated, and using that willful application of the mind, but it doesn't work. It always just leads to frustration. Because concentration, the real dropping into a more profound, still, quiet place, is a natural occurrence. And the proximate cause for that natural occurrence is the pleasure, the real inner pleasure. It's pleasurable, of tranquility and serenity. So we have every reason to get familiar with the pleasure of tranquility. In gross ways, when you're out in your day and you're sitting in the park bench and you're appreciating the sound of the birds. I was standing outside, just feeling the sun for a while, and there's a lot of bird activity. And just feeling that, and just, it's like that story. I know a lot of you have heard it, but it's a very telling story. The Buddha, when he was 4 or 5 years sitting under the rose apple tree, and he remembered it during his years of serious ascetic meditative practice. Oh, do I need to be afraid of that pleasure, of that deep calm? No, I don't need to be afraid. It's a very useful pleasure because it is the main ingredient for the mind dropping into a profound concentration. And that profound concentration is the cause for that radiant balance. And that profound balance really allows the mind to see things clearly, because it doesn't have any skin in the game when it has that profound equanimity. So then instead, like, I'm trying to understand the way it is, the knowing, the brilliant, calm, concentrated knowing, it's in that sort of perfect receptive mode. So nature is understood as it is. It's like a naturalist. If the naturalist has an agenda, the agenda skews the observation. And it's the same thing. We need that profound equanimity to actually get in the depth the way it is. Otherwise, we're looking at experience from the point of view of being a neurotic human being who's tired of being a neurotic human being and wants relief. But that will always skew our observation of our own experience. We'll always be seen in dualistic terms. I'm screwed up. I don't want to be screwed up anymore. Help me. And we're looking at our experience because we were told that if I look at it hard enough, somehow the answer will appear and then I'll be saved. But it doesn't happen that way. And we can be eternally frustrated. And Joseph has some really funny and heartbreaking stories about how frustrating it can be when we're a little or a lot off in terms of our striving. So this point, and the reason why I'm really highlighting the factor of serenity for this week with our home practice is it gets overlooked. And it's almost like we think, I don't deserve to be interested in the pleasure of tranquility and serenity. Who am I? I've got a busy life. I've been bad. I've done some bad things, because remorse is often in opposition, like all those unresolved things that we've never made amends to or for. It's like they do kind of haunt us, and they'll keep the heart from dropping in. Not that we lose the capacity to be settled, but we think because we did that, we don't deserve it because I'm bad, or I'm restless, or we have all these stories and we cling to them. And because we're clinging to them, they keep the heart from dropping in. So this is like we have to find our way back. And this is what I'd encourage you to talk about in your small groups tonight. Serenity, experiences of serenity. That would be the best to share, even just ordinary causes for that serenity. And describe in as much detail the texture and flavor of being settled, of being serene, being calm. Where did it arise? What do you imagine as you think back on that moment where the causes, if it lasted for a little bit, what allowed it to continue? What made it go away? How was it fed? How was it starved? That kind of thing. But of course, anything goes in these small groups. So I wanted to just remind folks that most of you know this, but there are a few newer folks taking the Buddhist Studies class. All of Common Ground programs all the way back since we began in 1993, all our programs have been offered freely. And the teachers and the administrators and the leaders here, we really practice this free giving. And of course, we can do that because the community, there's this beautiful, has been for a long, long time, circle of giving and receiving. And it's really protected the community. And it's really easy, like even me saying this now, it can always seem like, well, that's a very clever fundraising technique. But it's really, I'm saying this more as a spiritual teaching for us to explore here at Common Ground, but everywhere in our life, even in your jobs, even though you get paid and you might even have a contract, but to do the work of your job as a free gift. And every month or whatever, you get your paycheck. Whoa, look at that. They just sent me money. How great is that? I can pay the rent. I can buy some food. But to just see our relationships, our jobs, our participation in the world as a circle of giving and receiving. And really joyfully give when you're inspired to give. Feel the joy in that, the happiness in that. If you give too much, it won't feel good. So adapt and adjust. If you don't give anything in places in your life, it might not feel good. You just have to check. And we just ask people to do that with Common Ground, to really get good at receiving what you get from these teachings and from the organization, the teachers, as a free gift. And really let it land as a free gift, no strings attached. And if you feel like giving back, volunteering or giving money, then do it in a way that makes you happy. And really pay attention, like, if I gave more, would I be more happy? Would it make sense and lift this heart up more? Or if I gave less, would I feel happy? What would really allow me to, this relationship I have with Common Ground, to be a real cause for happiness in my life? And Common Ground's done pretty well that way. The community has purchased this building, serious renovation in this building for many years. We've purchased our retreat center. We have money in the bank. We operate really conservatively, so we don't have fears around money. So we can really operate this way and just let things unfold as they do. So just keep that in mind.